Get your filthy arm off my table now. I said move. You're disgusting. Greg Parker shoved his chair back. His lip curled like he had just stepped in something rotten. Sir, I barely touched you. You spilled your dirty coffee near me. His voice filled the entire cafe. Near my cup. This is exactly why people like you don't belong in places like this. Helen sat perfectly still, her hands folded on her lap. Her voice came out soft and steady. I'm sorry. It was an accident. An accident? No. Clean yourself up and get out of my sight. She was 68 years old, a retired schoolteacher, a grandmother. But what nobody in that cafe knew was who her son was. Man, talking to her like that? That's just wrong. Let's get into it. Let me take you back. Oakdale, Virginia. A small, quiet town about an hour outside Washington, D.C. The kind of place where everybody knows everybody. Where shop owners wave at you through glass windows. Where the same families have lived on the same streets for generations. The air had that crisp bite of autumn. Leaves were just starting to turn gold and copper along the edges of Main Street. 2 blocks down, vendors were setting up the weekly farmers market. The smell of fresh bread and apple cider drifted through the cool air. Right in the middle of town sat a little coffee shop called Nancys Roost. Exposed brick walls, mismatched wooden chairs, a chalkboard menu with handwritten specials. The espresso machine hissed and gurgled behind the counter like it had its own heartbeat. This wasn't some corporate chain. This was the kind of place where your name was already on the cup before you ordered. Helen Hayes walked in. She wore a cream-colored cardigan buttoned to the top. Reading glasses hung from a beaded chain around her neck. Her leather handbag was old, cracked along the strap. But she carried it like it was worth a fortune. The bell above the door jingled. Nancy Reed, the owner, looked up and smiled instantly. Morning, Helen. The usual? You know it, honey. Small decaf with cream, 1 blueberry scone. Her usual order. Ever since she retired, Helen held the door open for a young mother struggling with a stroller. She complimented the toddler's tiny sneakers. She dropped an extra $1 in the tip jar without looking at it. Just muscle memory from a lifetime of small kindnesses. She taught 3rd grade at Oakdale Elementary for many years. Half the adults in this town once sat in her classroom. She taught them to read. She taught them manners. She wiped their tears when their parents forgot to pick them up. Her husband, Robert, had been a postal carrier. Good man. Reliable hands. He died of cancer when their son, Jason, was young. Helen raised that boy alone. Worked 2 jobs some summers. Never complained. Never asked for a thing. Now she was 68 years old. Retired. Peaceful. Mornings at Nancy's were her small luxury. She took her usual seat by the window. Sunlight warmed the left side of her face. She unfolded a napkin across her lap, set her scone on a small plate, and took her first slow sip. For a while, the world was gentle. Then a black Escalade pulled up outside. It parked diagonally across 2 spots. The engine cut off with a heavy thud. The driver's door swung open wide, almost hitting a passing cyclist. Greg Parker stepped out. In his mid-40s, tailored navy blazer. A silver watch that caught the morning light. He was already talking into his phone, loud enough that people on the sidewalk turned their heads. He didn't hold the door for the woman walking out behind him. He walked straight to the counter, cutting in front of 2 people who were already waiting. Nancy's smile disappeared. She knew Greg. Everyone in Oakdale did. He was a real estate developer who had moved to town a few years back. Since then, he had bought up 6 properties on the east side. Old homes, black-owned businesses, affordable apartments, He tore them down and put up luxury condos. Long-time tenants were pushed out with 30-day notices. Small shop owners who couldn't afford the new rent simply vanished. Greg didn't negotiate. He acquired. He treated Oakdale like a chessboard, and the people who lived there like pieces he could sweep off whenever he pleased. He ordered loudly. A complicated custom drink. He called Nancys Price's highway robbery for a small-town dump. He tapped his credit card on the counter before she even finished making it. Then he turned around, scanning for a seat. His eyes landed on the small round table by the window. Helen's table. There was one empty chair across from her. Greg walked over, pulled the chair out, and sat down without a word, without asking, without even looking at her. He set his cup down hard. Some of it splashed onto the table. Helen glanced up. She offered a polite smile. She had no idea what was about to happen. For a moment, nothing happened. Helen sipped her coffee. Greg scrolled through his phone. Two strangers sharing a small table by the window separated by less than 2 feet of worn oak. Then Helen reached for her scone. Her elbow barely grazed Greg's cup. Just the faintest tap. A few drops of coffee slid down the side and pooled on the table. Greg looked down at the drops like they were poison. His head turned slowly toward Helen. His nostrils flared. His jaw tightened so hard the muscles in his neck popped. "Did you just touch my cup?" Helen blinked. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "You put your hands near my drink." His voice was low at first, controlled, like a man choosing his words carefully, not out of kindness, but out of cruelty. "Do you have any idea how revolting that is?" "Sir, it was just an accident." Don't talk to me." He grabbed a napkin and wiped the side of his cup with exaggerated disgust. He held the napkin between 2 fingers like it was contaminated. Then he dropped it on Helen's side of the table. "There. That's yours now." Helen said nothing. She folded her hands in her lap and looked down at her scone. The blueberries had gone blurry through the moisture building in her eyes. The cafe had gone quiet. The espresso machine let out a long, slow hiss. A spoon clinked against a saucer somewhere behind them. Nancy stood frozen behind the counter, a milk pitcher still in her hand. Greg wasn't done. "You know what I can't stand?" He wasn't talking to Helen anymore. He was talking to the room. His voice carried across every table, every corner. You go to a nice place. You try to enjoy your morning. And then someone like this, he gestured toward Helen with an open hand, just plants herself right next to you, touching your things, breathing on your food. Helen's lips pressed together. Her chin dipped slightly, but she didn't move. A woman at the next table shifted uncomfortably. Her husband stared hard at his plate. No one spoke. Greg leaned closer to Helen, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Sharp, expensive, suffocating. "Where are you even from?" he asked. "Because this isn't your kind of place. Trust me." Helen's voice came out so soft it barely reached the next table. "I've lived in this town for 42 years, sir." Greg laughed. Not a real laugh. A sound designed to make her feel small. 42 years. And you still don't know how to behave in public. He picked up his coffee and took a long, deliberate sip. Then he set it down hard enough to make Helen flinch. That was when he noticed the crumbs. A few tiny pieces of Helen's scone had fallen near the center of the table, barely visible. The kind of crumbs anyone would leave. Greg stared at them. His face twisted. "Are you an animal?" he said. "Look at this mess. You're eating like a pig." Helen reached for her napkin to clean up. Her hand was trembling. "Don't bother." Greg stood up. His chair screeched against the tile floor. The sound cut through the cafe like a knife. I've lost my appetite. He grabbed his cup and looked down at Helen. She was still sitting with her hands in her lap, her cream cardigan, her beaded glasses chain, the cracked leather handbag hanging from the back of her chair. Everything about her was quiet. Everything about her said, "I'm not a threat." Greg saw something different. "You owe me a coffee," he said. "You contaminated mine." "Sir, I didn't." "Open your mouth one more time." Silence. Greg turned toward the counter. "Nancy, make me a new one. And move this woman to another table." Nancy set the milk pitcher down slowly. Her voice was careful, but firm. "Greg, she didn't do anything wrong. She's been sitting there since before you came in. I don't care when she got here. I'm not sitting next to that." He didn't say a slur. He didn't need to. The word that hung in the air like smoke. Nancy didn't move. Greg's eyes narrowed. "Fine. You want to take her side? That's your choice." He turned back to Helen. "Get up." Helen looked at him. For the first time, there was something in her eyes beyond patience. It was pain. Deep, old, familiar pain. The kind that comes from hearing the same tone in 100 different voices across a lifetime. She began to stand, slowly. Her knees ached. You could see it in the way she braced one hand against the table. "Faster," Greg said. She reached for her handbag. Her fingers fumbled with the strap. Her scone was still sitting on the plate. One bite taken. Greg exhaled sharply through his nose. He grabbed her cup of coffee, the small decaf with cream she ordered every time, and turned it over. Coffee poured across the table. It dripped over the edge and onto Helen's lap. Warm brown liquid soaked into her cream cardigan. It ran down her skirt. It pooled on the tile beneath her shoes. Helen gasped. Her hands flew to her chest. The coffee had been warm, not scalding, but the shock hit harder than any burn. She stood there, dripping, speechless. Greg set the empty cup down on the table with a dull thud. "Now you match the mess you made." The cafe was frozen. 12 people sat in that room. Not one of them stood up. Not one of them said a word. A little girl at a corner table tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, why did that man do that?" The mother pulled the girl closer and whispered, "Don't look, sweetheart." Nancy came around the counter fast. She had napkins in one hand and fire in her eyes. "Greg, you need to leave right now. You are not welcome here anymore." Greg smirked. "Careful, Nancy. I own the building next door. Yours could be next." He straightened his blazer. He adjusted his silver watch. Then he looked down at Helen one last time. She was trying to wipe the coffee from the photograph. It had slipped out of the side pocket of her handbag when she stood up too fast. A small wallet-sized photo in a thin plastic sleeve. A man in a postal uniform smiling wide. Her husband, Robert. The coffee had soaked through the sleeve. The edges of the photo were turning brown. Helen's fingers moved gently across the image. Her lips were pressed tight. Her chin trembled. But she didn't cry. Not in front of him. She wouldn't give him that. Greg looked at the photo. He looked at Helen. And he laughed. "Sentimental," he said, the way someone says pathetic. Then he picked up his phone, stepped over the puddle of coffee on the floor, and walked toward the door. Nancy was already dialing 911. Her voice shook as she spoke into the phone. "I need someone at my shop, please." A man just assaulted an elderly woman. He poured coffee on her. "Yes, she's still here." She's shaking. Helen lowered herself back into her chair, coffee still dripping from her cardigan, the photo of Robert pressed flat against her chest. A young woman, college age, curly hair pulled back, rushed over and knelt beside her. "Ma'am, are you okay? Can I get you anything?" Helen looked at her. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked down at the photograph again. The coffee stain was spreading. Robert's smile was fading behind a brown blur, and for the first time, Helen's composure cracked. Just barely. A single tear slid down her cheek and landed on the back of her hand. She wiped it fast, like she was embarrassed. "I just wanted my morning," she whispered. "That's all I wanted." Outside, Greg leaned against his Escalade, laughing into his phone. He had no idea what he had just set in motion. Soon a patrol car pulled up. Red and blue lights flickered against the cafe windows. The short burst of a siren scattered a flock of pigeons from the sidewalk. Gravel crunched under heavy boots. Deputy Ryan Caldwell stepped out. Young, white, mid-20s. Clean uniform, stiff posture. The kind of officer who still walked like he was trying to prove something. He didn't go inside first. He went straight to Greg. Greg was still leaning against his Escalade, arms crossed, phone in hand. He saw the deputy and smiled. Not a nervous smile, a welcoming one. Like he had been expecting room service. "Officer, glad you're here." Greg extended his hand. Caldwell shook it without hesitation. "What happened, sir?" Greg tilted his head toward the cafe. "That woman in there caused a scene. Bumped into me, spilled coffee all over my jacket. When I asked her to be careful, she got aggressive, started yelling. The owner kicked me out for defending myself." Caldwell nodded slowly. He didn't write anything down. He didn't ask for another version. He just nodded. "She's still inside? By the window? Cream cardigan. You can't miss her." Deputy Caldwell walked into the cafe. The bell jingled. Every head turned. Helen was still in her chair. Nancy had brought her a damp towel. The young woman with curly hair was sitting beside her, holding her hand. Helen's cardigan was soaked dark brown from the chest down. Her glasses sat crooked on her nose. The cracked photograph of Robert was face down on the table, drying on a napkin. Caldwell looked at her. He looked at the puddle of coffee still on the floor. He looked at the empty cup sitting upside down on the table. Then he said, "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification." Helen blinked. "I'm sorry." "Your ID, ma'am." "Driver's license." Nancy stepped forward. "Deputy, she's the victim here. That man out there threw coffee on her. I saw the whole thing. I'm the one who called you." Caldwell held up one hand without looking at Nancy. "Ma'am, I need to hear from both parties. That's standard procedure." Helen reached into her handbag with shaking fingers. She pulled out her wallet. She handed over her Virginia driver's license. Caldwell studied it. He tilted it under the light. He looked at Helen's face, then back at the card, then at her face again, like he was searching for a mismatch that didn't exist. "Sit tight," he said. He walked back outside. Through the window, Helen watched Caldwell hand her license to Greg. Greg looked at it, smirked, and said something that made the deputy chuckle. Nancy's face went red. "He just showed that man your license," she whispered. "That's not right, Helen. That is not right." Helen said nothing. She folded her hands in her lap. Her fingers were still trembling. Before long, Caldwell came back inside. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to step outside so we can sort this out." "Sort what out?" Helen's voice was barely above a whisper. He poured coffee on me. I'm sitting here soaked. What exactly is there to sort out? Both parties have different accounts. I need to take your statements outside. Both parties? Nancy's voice cracked. I watched him dump that cup on her lap. There are 12 witnesses sitting right here. Caldwell turned to Nancy. His expression was flat, professional, completely empty. Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but I need to follow the procedure. Please, let me do my job. Helen stood up slowly. She picked up the photograph of Robert. She tucked it carefully into her handbag. She straightened her soaked cardigan with both hands, and she walked outside with her chin raised. The sunlight hit her face. The autumn breeze caught the smell of damp coffee on wet wool. The farmer's market music drifted from 2 blocks away. Banjo and fiddle, cheerful and completely wrong for this moment. Greg was waiting in the parking lot, arms crossed, grinning. There she is, he said, loud enough for the whole street to hear. Caldwell positioned Helen on one side of the lot and Greg on the other. But Greg didn't stay on his side. He strolled closer, step by step, until he was near enough for Helen to see the flecks of gold in his watch. You know how much this blazer cost? Greg tugged at his sleeve. $3,000. You probably don't make that in a month on your little pension. Helen didn't respond. What's the matter? Nothing smart to say now? He leaned in closer. Good. You should have kept that mouth shut from the start. Caldwell stood 10 feet away, scribbling on his notepad. He heard every single word. He did not look up. Greg began circling Helen, slowly, like she was something on display. You know what the real problem is? People like you show up in places you have no business being. You take up space. You make everything uncomfortable. And when somebody finally says something, oh, suddenly you're the victim. Helen's hands tightened around her handbag strap. Her knuckles went pale. Go back to wherever you came from, sweetheart. That's my friendly advice. A couple walking their dog stopped on the sidewalk and stared. A man loading groceries into his truck froze. A teenager sitting on a bench across the street quietly raised her phone and pressed record. Nobody noticed her. Then a white Mercedes pulled into the lot. The door swung open and out stepped Brooke Langston. Blonde highlights, oversized sunglasses, a camel-colored coat that probably cost more than Helen's monthly pension. She walked straight to Greg and kissed his cheek. What happened, babe? Greg tilted his head toward Helen. This woman attacked me in the cafe, ruined my blazer. Now the owner's siding with her. Brooke looked at Helen. She didn't see the soaked cardigan. She didn't see the shaking hands or the swollen eyes. She didn't see many years of teaching or the cracked photo of a dead husband tucked inside a worn leather bag. She saw exactly what Greg wanted her to see. Officer, Brooke said, turning to Caldwell with a polished smile. My husband is a very important figure in this community. He's a major donor to the sheriff's benevolent fund. I'm sure this can be handled quickly and appropriately. Caldwell straightened up. Yes, ma'am. Just finishing the report now. Helen stood completely alone, coffee drying stiff on her clothes, autumn sun warming a face that had gone cold from the inside. Not one person, not the deputy, not the husband, not the wife, had asked if she was hurt. Caldwell walked over to Helen with his notepad open. Ma'am, I'm writing up a disturbance report. Both parties may be cited for disorderly conduct. Helen looked at him. Her voice came out steady and quiet, broken somewhere deep that didn't show on the surface. He threw coffee on me, deputy, in front of a room full of people. And you're going to cite me? I'm documenting what both sides reported. There aren't two sides. There's a man who poured a cup of coffee on a 68-year-old woman. And there's that woman standing right in front of you, still wet. Caldwell paused. His pen hovered over the paper. For half a second, something flickered behind his eyes, something that almost looked like doubt. Then Greg's voice rang out from across the lot. "Officer, are we about done here? I've got a meeting." Caldwell clicked his pen shut. "Sit tight, ma'am. I'll be right back." He walked toward Greg. Helen stood alone against the brick wall of the cafe. The breeze picked up. It carried the distant sound of that banjo. Somewhere down the block, a child laughed. Helen reached into her handbag. She pulled out her phone. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through her contacts to one name. She pressed call. 2 rings. "Hey, Mama." Her voice cracked for the very first time. "Jason, honey, I need you. I'm at Nancys." A pause. Just 1 second. But in that single second, something shifted on the other end of the line. The warmth in her son's voice disappeared. It was replaced by something harder, something forged in 2 decades of service, discipline, and controlled fury. "Don't move, Mama. I'm on my way." She hung up. She slipped the phone back into her bag. She wiped her eyes once with the back of her hand. Then she straightened her stained cardigan, lifted her chin, and waited. Greg glanced over from across the lot. He saw the old woman by the wall, still wet, still quiet, still clutching that cracked leather handbag, like it was the only thing in this world keeping her upright. He smirked and looked away. He had absolutely no idea what he had just set in motion. A short while later, Helen didn't move from that wall. She stood with her back straight and her eyes forward. The coffee had dried into stiff brown streaks down her cardigan. Her fingers were still wrapped around the strap of her handbag. Greg was leaning on his Escalade, scrolling his phone, laughing at something on the screen. Brooke stood beside him, reapplying her lipstick in the side mirror. Deputy Caldwell was leaning against his patrol car, filling out paperwork like this was just another call. Nobody was watching the road. Then came the sound, a low rumble, deep, steady, the kind of engine note that doesn't come from a civilian vehicle. A black Chevrolet Suburban with tinted windows and federal government plates turned the corner onto Main Street. It rolled slowly past the farmer's market, past the brick front shops, past the little cafe with the chalkboard menu. It pulled into the parking lot and stopped. The engine cut off. For a moment, nothing happened. The door didn't open. No one stepped out. The lot went quiet. Even the banjo music from the market seemed to fade. Greg glanced up from his phone. Brooke lowered her lipstick. Deputy Caldwell stopped writing. Then the driver's door opened. A boot hit the pavement, black leather polished to a mirror shine. Then the second boot. Then he stood. Colonel Jason Hayes rose to his full height, 6'3", in full United States Army dress uniform. Dark green jacket pressed razor sharp. Rows of ribbons lined across his chest. Bronze Star, Meritorious Service Medal, Army Commendation with oak leaf clusters. Silver Eagle insignia gleamed on each shoulder. His cover sat perfectly straight on his head. His jaw was set like concrete. He closed the door behind him with a slow, deliberate click. The parking lot went dead silent. A woman on the sidewalk stopped mid-step. The man loading groceries set down his bag. The teenager with her phone still recording nearly dropped it. Jason didn't scan the lot. He didn't look at Greg. He didn't look at the deputy or the Mercedes or the Escalade parked sideways across 2 spots. He looked only at his mother. He walked toward her. Each step measured. Each step controlled. His shoes made no sound on the gravel. The ribbons on his chest caught the morning sun and threw tiny flashes of color across the brick wall behind Helen. Helen saw him and her whole body softened. Her shoulders dropped. Her grip on the handbag loosened. Her chin trembled once, just once, and then held. "Jason," she whispered. He reached her. He looked at the coffee stains down her chest. He looked at the smudged glasses sitting crooked on her nose. He looked at the dried tear tracks on her cheeks. He gently lifted her hand and turned it over. Her fingers were still shaking. His jaw tightened so hard a vein surfaced along his temple. He put both arms around her. She pressed her face into the chest of his uniform. Her small frame nearly disappeared inside his. He held her for a moment. No words, just breath. Then he let go. He straightened up, and he turned around. Greg's smirk was gone. Completely gone. His phone was frozen halfway to his pocket. His mouth hung slightly open. His eyes moved from the ribbons to the insignia, to the government plates on the Suburban, and the color drained from his face like water from a cracked glass. Brooke took a half step backward. Her sunglasses slid down her nose. She didn't push them back up. Deputy Caldwell dropped his pen. Jason walked to the center of the parking lot. He stopped exactly between his mother and Greg. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I'm Colonel Jason Hayes, Judge Advocate General's Corps, United States Army." He paused. "Let it land. Who threw coffee on my mother?" Greg's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "Look, it was a misunderstanding, man. She bumped into me. And I didn't ask for your version." Jason's voice was level, calm. The kind of calm that makes your stomach drop. "I asked who did it." He turned to the cafe door. Nancy was standing there, arms crossed, eyes red. "Nancy, tell me what happened." Nancy told him everything. Every word Greg said. Every drop of coffee. The napkin thrown at Helen's face. The handbag dumped on the floor. The photograph of Robert soaking in a brown puddle. Jason listened without moving, without blinking. Then he turned back to Greg. "What you did today constitutes assault and battery under Virginia Code 18.2-57. His voice carried across the entire lot. "Given the racial language multiple witnesses have reported, you people go back where you came from, sticky fingers. This may qualify for hate crime enhancement under 18.2-57. Subsection C." Greg's face went white. Paper white. I never said. "That's not what I also serve on the board of the Virginia Civil Rights Legal Defense Fund." Jason took one step closer. "So I'd choose my next words very carefully, if I were you." Greg said nothing. For the first time all morning, Greg Parker had absolutely nothing to say. Behind Jason, the teenager across the street was still recording. Her phone caught everything. The uniform, the insignia. The moment Greg's arrogance collapsed in on itself like a building with no foundation. Brooke was already backing toward her Mercedes. Jason pulled out his phone. He dialed a number from memory. Not 911, a direct line. "This is Colonel Hayes. I need the watch commander at the Oakdale County Sheriff's Office." "Yes, I'll hold on." Greg took a step backward. His heel caught the curb and he stumbled. He didn't fall, but the stumble was enough. Everyone in that parking lot saw it. The man who had towered over Helen minutes ago was now shrinking. "Yes, sir. I'm at Nancys Roost on Main Street. There's been an assault on an elderly woman. I have multiple witnesses and video evidence. I'd like a senior officer dispatched immediately. Your deputy on scene may need supervisory support." Deputy Caldwell's face went gray. He looked down at his notepad. The words he had written suddenly seemed very small. Before long, a second patrol car pulled in. The door opened, and out stepped Sergeant Hank Riley. Tall, broad-shouldered, silver at the temples. A man who had clearly been doing this job for a very long time. He walked straight to Jason. They shook hands. Firm. Familiar. "Colonel Hayes. Been a while." "Sergeant Riley. Wish it were better circumstances." They knew each other from veterans events, community fundraisers, the kind of mutual respect that doesn't need explanation. Jason walked Riley through the situation, calmly, precisely, like a man delivering a briefing. Nancy confirmed every detail. The young woman with curly hair added what she had seen. 2 other cafe patrons who had followed the crowd outside offered their accounts. Then the teenager with the phone stepped forward. "I got it all on video," she said. From the moment he started yelling at her in the parking lot. Everything. Riley took the phone. He watched a portion of the footage. His expression didn't change, but his grip on the phone tightened. He handed it back. "Thank you, miss. I'll need a copy of that." Then Riley turned to Greg. Greg was standing by his Escalade, arms no longer crossed, hands at his sides. His blazer was unbuttoned. His silver watch caught the light, but it didn't look impressive anymore. It looked like costume jewelry on a man playing dress-up. "Mr. Parker." Greg straightened. "Sergeant, listen, this has been completely blown out of proportion. I'd like to. Sir, you're under arrest for assault and battery." The words landed like a hammer on glass. "You can't be serious." Greg's voice pitched upward. "Do you know who I am? I'm a major developer in this town. I donate to the sheriffs. I know exactly who you are, Mr. Parker." Riley's voice was flat and final. "Turn around, please. This is insane. I want my lawyer. You'll have access to your attorney at the station." "Turn around." Greg looked at Jason, then at Caldwell, then at the crowd that had gathered on the sidewalk. 15, maybe 20 people now. Some holding phones, all watching. He turned around. Riley pulled Greg's wrists behind his back. The handcuffs clicked shut. 2 sharp metallic snaps that echoed across the quiet lot. Greg flinched at the sound like it burned him. Brooke rushed forward. "Officer, please. There has to be some mistake. My husband would never." Riley didn't look at her. "Ma'am, you're welcome to meet your husband at the station." Brooke's mouth opened, then closed. Her chin crumpled. She turned and walked quickly to her Mercedes, not because she felt sorry for Helen. Because people were watching. Riley guided Greg into the back of the patrol car. Greg ducked his head, not by choice. The door shut with a heavy thud. Through the window, his face was tight, jaw clenched, eyes darting. He looked small behind that glass. Riley turned to Deputy Caldwell. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Ryan, a word." They stepped aside. Riley spoke quietly. Caldwell's face drained of what little color it had left. "We're going to review your body camera footage. And then we're going to have a very long conversation about how you handled this today." Caldwell said nothing. He stared at the ground. Back by the cafe wall, Helen sat on the wooden bench. Jason was beside her, his arm around her shoulders. Nancy had brought out a fresh cup of decaf and a new blueberry scone. The young woman with curly hair was still there, standing quietly nearby, like a gentle guard. Helen held the warm cup with both hands. Steam drifted up past her face. She looked at the patrol car where Greg sat behind the glass. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She looked down at her cup and whispered to no one in particular, "I just wanted my morning, baby. That's all." Jason pulled her a little closer. He kissed the top of her head. "I know, Mama, I know." The video hit the internet and spread fast. The teenager, her name was Sophie, posted a short clip on social media. She didn't add music, she didn't add filters, she didn't need to. The raw footage spoke for itself. Greg Parker's voice, loud and clear, telling a 68-year-old woman to go back where she came from. His finger pointing in her face. His wife smiling beside him. A deputy doing nothing. And then, the Suburban pulling in. The boots, the uniform, the ribbons. It quickly racked up hundreds of thousands of views and soon passed 2 million. The hashtag started small. A handful of local accounts sharing the clip with a single line. Hashtag Justice for Helen. It was trending in Virginia and then went national. Claire Bennett, a reporter from the regional NBC affiliate, was the first journalist on the ground. She showed up at Nancys Roost with a camera crew. Nancy gave her full account on camera. Steady voice, wet eyes. "That woman has been coming here every week for years," Nancy said. "She has never raised her voice. She has never caused a single problem. And that man treated her like she was garbage on his shoe." 3 other witnesses agreed to go on camera. Their stories matched. Every detail. The coffee, the napkin, the photograph of Robert on the wet floor. Then Claire sat down with Helen. Helen wore a navy blue dress. Her hair was neatly pinned. She had new reading glasses. Jason had driven her to pick them out the day before. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, the same way she had sat in that cafe. She didn't cry on camera. She didn't raise her voice. She simply told the truth. "I walked in that morning expecting nothing more than a cup of coffee and a blueberry scone. I walked out soaking wet with a cracked photograph of my late husband, wondering what I did wrong." She paused. "The answer is nothing. I didn't do anything wrong." The interview aired and was picked up by 3 national networks. And then the digging began. Investigative journalists pulled Greg Parker's business records. What they found turned a local incident into a national scandal. Over the past couple of years, Greg had purchased 7 properties in historically black neighborhoods on the east side of Oakdale. Each time, the pattern was identical. He would buy the building, double the rent overnight, and issue 30-day eviction notices when tenants couldn't pay. Families that had lived in those homes for decades were pushed out in weeks. Former tenants came forward. One elderly man said Greg had told him to find somewhere more appropriate for someone like you. A single mother described being threatened with legal action when she asked for an extension. A barber shop owner who had operated on the same corner for 22 years said Greg called his business an eyesore dragging down property values. None of them had spoken publicly before. Helen's story gave them courage. The county prosecutor's office moved fast. Greg Parker was formally charged with assault and battery under Virginia Code 18.2-57 with a hate crime enhancement under subsection C. Separately, Jason filed a civil lawsuit on Helen's behalf. Through the Virginia Civil Rights Legal Defense Fund, citing physical assault, emotional distress, racial harassment, and elder abuse, Greg's attorney, a high-priced defense lawyer from Richmond, attempted to negotiate a plea deal. Misdemeanor assault, no jail time, community service, a fine. The judge reviewed the video. He reviewed the witness statements. He reviewed the pattern of behavior from the former tenants. He reviewed the body camera footage from Deputy Caldwell, which showed Caldwell laughing with Greg while Helen sat inside, soaked and shaking. The plea deal was rejected. The trial took place. The prosecution played Sophie's video in full. They played Nancy's 911 call. They brought 4 witnesses to the stand. They showed photographs of Helen's stained cardigan, her cracked reading glasses, and the coffee-damaged photograph of Robert. The defense argued it was a momentary loss of temper, an isolated incident, a man under business pressure who reacted poorly. The prosecution responded with testimony from 6 former tenants, 6 separate accounts of racial intimidation, a pattern stretching back years. Greg took the stand in his own defense. It lasted 11 minutes. Under cross-examination, he contradicted himself 3 times. He claimed he never touched Helen's coffee cup. The video showed otherwise. He claimed he never used racially charged language. 4 witnesses said otherwise. He claimed Helen had been aggressive toward him first. Nancy's 911 call, made in real time, said otherwise. The jury deliberated quickly. Guilty. Assault and battery with hate crime enhancement. The sentencing followed. The courtroom was packed. Local press lined the back wall. Claire Bennett sat in the second row with her notebook open. The judge spoke directly to Greg before reading the sentence. Mr. Parker, this court has reviewed not only the events but a broader pattern of conduct that reflects a deep contempt for the dignity of others. You targeted a woman who posed no threat. You humiliated her in public. And when law enforcement arrived, you attempted to weaponize their authority against her. Greg stood with his hands clasped in front of him. His attorney stood beside him. Neither moved. This court sentences you to 18 months in the county detention facility, 5 years of supervised probation upon release, 500 hours of community service to be completed in the communities you displaced, mandatory completion of a racial sensitivity and bias intervention program, and restitution to Mrs. Helen Hayes in the amount determined by the civil proceeding. Greg's knees buckled slightly. His attorney caught his arm. In the gallery, Helen sat beside Jason. She wore the same navy dress from her interview. Her hands were folded in her lap. Jason's arm rested behind her on the bench. She showed no satisfaction, no triumph, just quiet, steady resolve. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked Helen how she felt. Helen paused. She looked at the microphone, then past it, then at the sky. I feel like my husband would be proud of our son, she said. And I feel like maybe this town remembers now that everybody sitting in that cafe deserved to be there, including me. The fallout continued. Deputy Ryan Caldwell was placed on administrative leave pending a full internal affairs review. His body camera footage became a training case study. He eventually completed a mandatory retraining program. In a later interview, he admitted publicly that implicit bias had guided his response that morning. The county sheriff's office implemented new protocols for responding to reports involving people of color. An independent oversight committee was formed. 3 of the former tenants Greg had displaced filed their own civil suits. Brooke Langston filed for legal separation shortly after the verdict. Her attorney cited irreconcilable differences. The court of public opinion had a shorter phrase for it. Sometime after the verdict, Jason was invited to speak at the annual Oakdale Veterans Dinner. 200 people filled the community hall. Folding chairs, paper tablecloths, the smell of roast beef and cheap coffee drifting from the kitchen. American flags lined the walls. A brass band played softly in the corner. When Jason stepped to the podium, the room went quiet. He didn't talk about his career. He didn't mention his rank or his medals or the years he had spent serving overseas. He didn't talk about the trial. He talked about his mother. When I was young, my father died, he said. Cancer. He was a postal carrier. Worked 6 days a week for 23 years. Never missed a route. He paused. The room didn't breathe. After he passed, my mother didn't stop. She got up the next morning and went to school. She taught 30 kids how to read that year. She came home, made dinner, checked my homework, and ironed my clothes for the next day. She did that every single day for the next 25 years. His voice stayed steady. His hands rested on the sides of the podium. She never told me the world owed me anything. She never told me it would be fair. She told me to stand up straight, speak clearly, and treat every person I meet with the same respect I want for myself. He looked down for a moment. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. The hardest part of that day at the cafe wasn't confronting the man who hurt her. It wasn't the arrest. It wasn't the trial. He swallowed. It was seeing my mother on her knees on a wet tile floor picking up a cracked photograph of my father, while a room full of people watched and said nothing. The room was silent. A woman in the third row wiped her eyes with a napkin. A retired Marine at the back table pressed his lips together and nodded once. Jason stepped away from the podium. He didn't wait for applause. He walked straight to the table where Helen sat, pulled out the chair beside her, and took her hand. The room rose to its feet. Life in Oakdale slowly returned to its rhythm. The farmers' market still ran every week. The banjo player still set up on the corner. Nancy still opened the cafe early. And Helen still walked in. Same cream cardigan. New one, a gift from Jason. Same beaded glasses chain. Same small decaf with cream. Same blueberry scone. But things were different now. People greeted her by name. Not just the regulars, everyone. The new couple who moved in down the street. The teenager who used to sit on the bench across the road. The mail carrier who had taken over Robert's old route years ago. Children waved at her through the window. Nancy hung a small frame photograph near the register. Helen and Jason side by side, taken the week after the incident. Helen was smiling. Jason had his arm around her. Behind them, the chalkboard menu still listed the same specials. Underneath the frame, Nancy had written in her careful handwriting, "Everybody belongs here." Helen used every dollar from the restitution to create the Hayes Family Scholarship, a fund for first-generation college students in Oakdale. The first two recipients were announced later. One was the daughter of a barber, whose shop Greg had shut down. The other was Sophie, the teenager who had pressed record. Helen handed them each a letter at the ceremony. Inside, she had written the same line to both of them. "Your voice matters. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like it doesn't." Okay, but yeah, this story is made up. But man, the feeling of someone treating you like you're invisible, that's way too real. And what really messes me up the most isn't guys like Greg. In the end, what stayed with me long after the last scene wasn't the dramatic arrival of the colonel, or the moment the handcuffs clicked shut. It was the quiet image of Helen Hayes sitting alone at that little table, hands folded in her lap, trying so hard to keep her dignity while a grown man poured coffee down her front and told her she didn't belong. This story reminds us of a hard but beautiful truth. Real strength isn't always loud, uniformed, or powerful in the moment. Sometimes the greatest strength looks like a 68-year-old retired teacher who refuses to cry in front of her abuser, who still lifts her chin even when her cardigan is soaked and her hands are shaking. It's the strength of quiet kindness that has been practiced for decades, of raising a son alone after losing your husband, of showing up every Saturday for the same small joy, no matter what the world throws at you. The real lesson is this: never underestimate the quiet power of ordinary, decent people, and never forget that silence in the face of cruelty makes all of us smaller. Standing up for what's right doesn't always require a uniform or a title. Sometimes it only requires one person brave enough to say, "That's not okay," before it's too late. So the next time you see someone being humiliated, disrespected, or treated as less than human, Ask yourself, will I be part of the crowd that looks away? Or will I be the voice that changes everything? If this story touched something deep in your heart, if it made your chest tighten or brought tears to your eyes, drop a comment below and tell me honestly, what would you have done if you were sitting in that cafe that morning? Would you have spoken up, or would you have stayed silent? I read every single comment, and I truly want to hear your thoughts. And if these kinds of powerful, real-life lessons mean something to you, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story that reminds us who we're supposed to be. Stand up even when your voice shakes, especially then. See you in the next one.